And that was the thing about the bungalows, that all of the materials in the bungalow are pretty much bought off the shelf. So concrete blocks, concrete sills, concrete lintels, the windows. And that all of these standard elements made up the shape and the size of the bungalow. And that standardization of the materials fed into why it's a vernacular, because it speaks of the time, speaks of the need, speaks of the style. And the trusses would have been part of that prefabrication. Just it happened to be in timber and steel, whereas a lot of the other elements were concrete. So the biggest problem probably would have been getting them up onto the roof and making sure they were all plumb and level and that they were properly braced together so as the roof wouldn't fall off or whatever. And then afterwards, so what would happen then is if you had, say, a row of 11 or 12, or probably about 20 of these in a roof, you put felt down over it, like a big tent, and then you'd run battens along it to hold the felt down. And then off those battens, you'd hang the tiles in sort of ripples and waves down over the roof, so clay profile tiles. That was essentially the roof. And then basically they'd run along up to a chimney and then continue past the chimney. And the chimney would help brace them as well. So it was like basically made of concrete blocks, the chimney. So, yeah, these are the original drawings that would have been produced in Kells Art Studio, which you can see written there, Kells Art Studio, Kells, County Meath, with 3-digit telephone numbers. The way Fitzsimons did it, and I didn't realise this until I came into the archive, exactly how he went about it. I always thought it was large A1 drawings, but they're actually sort of, they're not really any size. They're not A2, they're not A3. They're a weird kind of in-between size. So the 3 sets of drawings are this. You've got the elevation here. So this is what it looks like from the road. And then this is what it looks like from the elevation from this side here. This is the plan. This is essentially the layout of the bungalow. So your dining room, living room, kitchenette, bathroom, and 3 bedrooms. And then there's a little boiler in here. So you have your central hearth here for fire, and you have your boiler here taking heat off it. And this then would have sent hot water not only into places like the bathroom, but also around the radiators around the house like that there. So when you would have bought the book off say a DIY store or a newsagent's or a petrol station or whatever, and then you'd ring Jack and you'd say, can I get design number 1? I need 6 copies to go in for planning. And he'd send you out 6 copies of this, this, and this. And then they'd all go into planning with your site map and your all of the other pieces of information that you needed for the planning pack at that time. That's essentially how it happened. Then you received planning and then you built based on these details, these dimensions, these construction details, and where these windows were, and this general overall aesthetic. This is what you followed. And then that's how the house appeared on the landscape. When we were very young, my brother and I used to stand in front of the window of our sitting room and peer out at the world. Our house, I should say, is pure bungalow bliss, straight from the book, design number 108, the Hazels, except for one tiny difference. The builders got the split levels, floor joists, all wrong. My father, a builder and salt merchant, once came close to complete ruin. After many visits from a young bank manager whose manner was kind, my father was forced to sell his warehouses by the sea, his residential properties, all of his trucks, vans and lorries, and most of his salt stock. What was left of the stock was deposited one morning outside of our house and covered over with a white sheet of plastic. My father spent 4 months in bed. The autumn day he chose to re-enter the world was so clear that I was sure he would cry when he saw it. But he simply sat at the kitchen table and drank a cup of steaming coffee in a strange, deliberate manner. Eventually he called the family to the table and said, "That, out there, under that tarpaulin, is all I have left." We turned, and looked at the white, quaking mound. Underneath that sheet of plastic is 3 tons of salt, he said, and, he said, we must get it indoors before the winter comes. The 3 tons of salt were stacked on the upper part of our split-level home where the builders had built the joists incorrectly, and some creaking weeks later, the whole ziggurat of salt and timber and nail and dust came clattering down, crushing my dear brother, my mother, and me. As for my father, I have no way of telling what he did next or where he went. When we were very young, my brother and I used to stand in front of the window of our sitting room and peer out at the world. Our house, I should say, is pure bungalow bliss, straight from the book, design number 108, The Hazels, except for one tiny difference. The builders, unpaid for weeks, decided to construct it with substandard blocks. When my father noticed cracks all over the house, he invited an engineer to carry out a survey. The engineer found the walls had been built with cavity blocks with a large percentage of salt in them and were criminally substandard. Armed with this report, my father and his solicitor tracked down the builders and threatened to sue them into the ground. They agreed to reconstruct the walls of the house inside the existing walls of salt block. I remember the hammering and churning and cursing and smoking around our abode, the strange men, their smells, their breath. So my dad was an engineer, and so he had a drawing office in at the end of our home, which was a kind of a bungalow, and I used to go down to the drawing office and watch him doing his drawings and all this kind of stuff. And a lot of the houses he was doing were bungalows, planning permissions for local people, you know. And there would have been copies of this Bungalow Bliss house and books, publications like it, knocking about down the office when I was a young lad. And then, of course, I worked for him for a couple. When I went and studied engineering, I used to come back during 1 or 2 of the summers and I'd do a bit of work for him in the office. So I ended up drawing a few bungalows. It's only recently then that I realised that what I was trying to do over the last 12 years was to try and establish a way for looking at the bungalows. And it is, I feel like it's only now that I'm actually skilled in looking at them or understanding them in any kind of way. And I think the way of looking at them is that you need a number of lenses at once, sort of layered up, like say at opticians or whatever. And that's the kind of way to look at them in a sort of, you know, in a multiple kind of way at once. So like say if you looked at them through the lens of architecture, they wouldn't be that impressive or interesting. And I think that has been why no architect has engaged with them successfully, because architecture and the architectural tools and the architectural ideals, they're not, those grammars don't meet well. So you have to kind of look at them in some other way. So that's basically what I've been doing, trying to establish a way of looking. And I think the book that I've done, and that's coming out with Lilliput, I think that shows well, I think, that's why I might be proud of it, is that it shows well the way of looking.